Next Generation Extension Learning for Leaders webinar series. We added this one because it just felt like this opportunity to learn more about the task force report on agricultural and rural prosperity that came from USDA led by Sonny Purdue, that this opportunity to learn more about this, especially right now as we've just gone through an FY18 budget process and looking at an FY19 budget process and the possibility that infrastructure dollars would be appropriated at some point and at least to some degree tied to this Rural Prosperity Task Force report. Just seemed like the right time for us to dig a little deeper on this question and try to better understand what it means for rural places across the U.S. as well as for cooperative extension's potential role thereof. So we have three very distinguished panel members, people who are leaders in our business who really are thinking deeply about these issues. We'll lead off with Brent Elrod, USDA National Program Leader for Community and Rural Development, and a person in NIFA who's been a great partner for Cooperative Extension, Brent, for so many years, first with the Department of Defense project and then more recently in your current role. So thank you, Brent, for being on. After that, we'll bring on Rachel Wellborn, and many of us know Rachel through her work with Civil Discourse, and now thinking about how our rural development centers are connected with this big idea around this task force report. And then Bo Ballou, who is the director of the Purdue Center for Regional Development and closely affiliated with extension and extension work at Purdue University, and a person who is active in the deployment of many of the ideas that are aligned with this task force report. So we very much look forward to your conversation. We also look forward to the Q&A that comes after this as we seek to better understand what our opportunities are. So Brent, Rachel, and Bo, I'll turn it over to all of you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Hibbard. Appreciate the time today and everyone's attendance and participation. Rachel's going to help advance the slides for us. So we've been having this conversation for some time here as a new administration has come on board, and we've tried to be proactive in thinking about how NIFA and Cooperative Extension can really position ourselves to demonstrate the role that the land-grant university system and Cooperative Extension play and have been playing already to address and really work to solve some of the challenging issues that rural America and across the country faced. So we've got an agenda slide that has a number of items that, well, first we dropped in the discussion slide because we thought we would give you this opportunity to begin thinking ahead as we're having our conversation about how you might respond to this issue. So we're really looking at positioning Cooperative Extension so it can demonstrate strengths in helping address issues across rural America. And so some of the ideas that we wanted to put out there today were the idea of developing a shared template that would allow us to collect and gather the information comprehensively. Also then potentially resulting in a narrative report that allows us to again point to the big picture and then drill down on state-specific responses around the topic areas that we're going to get to. And also then to encourage potentially the state or the university to tell its own story, because you're going to have opportunities to meet with USDA's state rural directors, rural development directors, potentially folks from leadership, and then obviously your legislative affairs are going to have opportunities with members of Congress, either back home or here in the nation's capital. So what we wanted to do first is bring on the next slide to give you the overall. I'm going to talk about, actually going back just one, Rachel, there to the agenda. And so I'm going to overview the priorities that were identified, and then also just talk briefly about the omnibus and the budget opportunities as we continue to discern them. And then spend a little bit of time with Rachel talking about how the RRDCs have already kind of taken this task on from a regional perspective, and then with a focus on one of those priority areas around e-connectivity and broadband. So she's going to give some highlighted information, and again, about how we're coordinating through the centers with the system and here in Washington to, again, help folks understand the role that extension and research can play. Bo is going to then address how Purdue has looked at this comprehensively on behalf of their university in their state and beyond, and they've just done some outstanding work that I'm sure you'll be excited to see. And then that discussion slide will certainly take your questions, but more importantly, hear from you about what you may have already been doing or what you're considering, or again, what might be a better approach for the entire system to move things forward. So I'll kick us off with this next slide. You always hear about your plan of work aligning with NIFA's strategic plan, the reaction plan, the USDA strategic plan. And so now we're adding one more piece to the puzzle. And so we've got this Ag and Rural Prosperity Task Force report and its priority areas. In addition, you know, Congress passed the Farm Bill out of markup on Thursday. And so we've got the Farm Bill principles that also have been outlined. And so where then do you choose, or where do you focus? And so what we're trying to do is kind of think about this again in a way with the administration, the USDA strategic goals, the Farm Bill piece, and then the plan when it comes in place when we get a new undersecretary. And then, of course, NIFA's doing its work on a strategic plan. And so we're thinking about these, the way to outline these as well. So in the chat box, I included a link to the USDA page that they've set up around rural prosperity, which is a nice one to follow along. So if folks want to look at that and maybe click on that as we move to the next slide, then that's another way for you to go back and see kind of the process that led to this report. As you know, the president issued an executive order. USDA led a government-wide effort then to develop recommendations about how the federal government can work together most effectively to address issues related to ag and rural prosperity. Those were then winnowed down to a number of recommendations that made it into the actual report and a number of priority areas. And you see those listed there. And what I think is helpful is, as you see them on the slide, but also then on the website, you can kind of get the hierarchy in terms of how the Office of the Secretary is thinking about these. They see e-connectivity and broadband as the overarching priority that then includes and or leads to economic development, innovation and technology advances, workforce improvements, and then overall quality of life. And within those, on the previous slide, but if you're on the website with me too, then you see some of the subcategories that are included within each of those priority areas. And so this is really how as the department is ramped up with its new political appointments and some of its realignments. Many of you know that the rural development has stood up a couple different offices, including one on rural innovation. And so they're looking at these areas then and staffing accordingly across the department and within rural development, some of the other agencies, in order to focus attention and effort around these particular issues. And so as we were starting to discern some of this from the outset in conversations with the regional center directors, others, we thought, well, let's go ahead and get ahead of the curve and identify the work that's already underway on the research side and also obviously on the outreach and education side, so that we could then help inform some of the new folks and some of the folks that have been changing positions about the opportunity to partner with us, to collaborate with us, and or to identify resource support for programs like Stronger Economies Together, other that have been in place for some time. And so with that, then I'm going to start the handoff as we move over to the next slide after this one, when Rachel will talk specifically about the work that the centers have done and then lead you to the actual outputs that have occurred thus far and also some of the thinking and planning going forward in terms of our engagement with other USDA and government partners. But before that, I wanted to kind of again put the other piece of the puzzle here for you consideration. And we've got the federal budget opportunities. And so then where can the land grant system identify those points of entree? Where is the oncoming opportunities for strategic partnership, potential grants, other areas of collaboration? So clearly we've got the new budget. With that, there was a 25 million increase for AFRI. So expect to see the fiscal year 18 announcements for AFRI coming out sometime before the end of the month, if all goes according to plan. And those will be areas, and there you will likely see language in those RFAs that correspond to some of the overall administration and department focus areas, and especially within Robin Shoemaker's ag, economics, and rural communities. There may be some specific language that refers to some of the work that's already been underway. And to Robin and Wesley Dean's credit, in our shop, they've been participating in meetings with us where we've had convenings with other federal partners so that they can understand where the direction is and potentially how to inform some of that language to invite responses from the system to conduct research and also integrated approaches that involve extension. With the omnibus, there was a $600 million that was included for broadband deployment through RD, specifically through the Rural Utility Service. What we're not seeing, and what we would like, and what we've been trying to rally the troops around for some time, is it's all well and good to spend this money on access and implementation, but if we're not thinking forwardly about adoption, then we're ultimately doing a disservice to these communities and these families, because they may not understand how best to utilize and or implement. So Rachel will talk further about that as I hand it off. Clearly, we've also got the Farm Bill, as I mentioned, that's come out of markup. Where it goes from here, your guess is as good as ours. Sonny met with staff at our sub-institute yesterday and told us he doesn't think it's really going to move forward, just specifically because of the differences around SNAP and SNAP-Ed. There's also the 3 question marks behind the $1 trillion infrastructure bill, because the thinking is that that's not going to move in its current form, but what we're seeing are potentially pieces that would are included in that are sprinkled through the omnibus, including that broadband deployment piece, and also some predictions that, based on the outcomes of the November midterms, that we could see components of that infrastructure bill take shape in other formats. So that's going to be a continued area to watch. We've got also the R&D priorities, as the administration has announced. And so you've got that PDF link up for you to peruse and kind of give some thought to that as well. I just don't want to leave it with just that focus on broadband, because clearly there's a lot of action that continues to go on around opioids, behavioral health issues, a number of bills that are being considered on the Hill, a number of initiatives that are underway with RD, and we're also at the table. ECOP and Rick and Chuck have stood up the task force that's looking at this particular issue. We're having conversations with RD and others to make sure that extension is at the table and potentially is able to access support if and when it becomes available. So we're doing that part here, but without going down that rabbit hole, I'll hand it off to Rachel so that she can give updates and link you to the material that the centers have created before Bo speaks to the state example.
All right, and appreciate having this opportunity to visit with you this afternoon. I was able to share these when I was at ECOP meeting a few weeks ago. That the centers were in DC in February, and at this point the report from the task force had just recently come out, and so we began to think about what could we do rather quickly to demonstrate how the regional rural development centers and the land-grant universities are working collaboratively across these 5 priorities. So we took a little bit of time and pulled together some examples, both from research and extension, about where we're addressing these. And if you look in your chat box, you'll see that there's another link there where these are posted and let you look at them in a little more detail. But it does just give one way that we can demonstrate what we are doing. So as we shared these in DC, we did get a very, very favorable response from the different agencies with which we met. they were glad to see something very concrete that says, okay, these are exactly the kinds of things, not that this is everything, but just the kinds of things that we're doing. So as we talked through that, and you saw in the first discussion question, the question comes back to how can we do this and do it even better? We were continually learning that as new people are brought into this new administration, some of them really don't have a history with the land grant system and particularly with extension. And so how can we help share the story about the important work we're already doing in each of these priority areas? So one of those where we're going to spend a little extra time is talking about e-connectivity and what's going on with the regional rural development centers along with our land grant partners. So there is a national team that we've been working with for a number of years and really started under Bo's leadership when he was here at SRDC. But we are bringing together some of our extension people who have leadership and also some research people that really know this area well. So we're able to bring them together last January for a 3-day kind of planning meeting and have again reestablished some priorities that can help really support the system as a whole in some key areas. And so the first here is connecting communities. How do we help communities that are thinking about broadband access to really do the planning that it takes to get them to that first stage of just even having the infrastructure in place. And then we do know that it's going to be very important not only to have the infrastructure in place, but also to support community members with digital literacy. If you've never used broadband, never had internet access, how do you begin those first stages that help people understand the benefits and really access them? And as Brent mentioned, these support the other priorities from the task force, such as workforce development and quality of life and economic development. So all of those have a place in this e-connectivity conversation. And then also a piece of this is looking at partnership development. Who are the partners on the national, on the state, and even local level that can help do this work alongside of us? So one of the projects that we're working on right now is we've identified a number of partners on the federal level. We have, I think on my list, there's about 20 or 30 different names, some of which from the same agency. We've had one initial conversation with them just a few weeks ago about an idea of mapping what some of the federal partners are doing in this space. It's kind of complicated to look at all of the different agencies that have a piece of this and really get a sense of how these connect together. So we've been talking and we've got a commitment from some of these federal partners to look at this with us. And we're going to be using the same format that our extension leadership team developed, which is thinking about the e-connectivity across a continuum of support. So you can notice that these 4 arrows here in the middle are overlapping. So it's not like you go from one step to the next, to the next, to the next, but they start and then they overlap and it's not a real clean step. But just very quickly, the first one is about awareness of the relevance. Why, if I've never had broadband before, why do I need it? Tell me that story. Help me understand as a community member, as a local government, as local businesses, why this matters to me. So it begins there, and that's something that Extension has a really strong role in working with communities to help them understand the value that they might get from this resource. And then the second step, access and availability, is more about the infrastructure. It's getting the pieces in place, the wiring, the whatever that connection is going to look like, that actually does give people the access that they've not had previously. But then, as I mentioned, we go from there to adoption. Just because I have it doesn't mean I'm going to access it as a community member. So how do we help bridge that gap between adoption and access? And we know it's not just one of these ideas of build it and they will come. We know that there's quite a bit here. There's a good bit of research that's already gone on about what are some of those kinds of concerns that we need to address between these two pieces. And then finally, utilization is not only do I have access, I've bought the service, or I've accessed it, and however that is, but I'm actually finding meaningful ways to use it so that I'm getting the benefit again, whether that's as an individual, as a business in a small rural area, or those governments, those local governments also. So across this timeline, there needs to be community planning and collaboration. And then undergirding the whole thing is the need for policy research, evaluation that looks at how we're doing what we're doing, what are we learning from it in the process, and how can we use those lessons learned to help advance this work in other places. So this is some of the work that we're doing right now, and as we look to our federal partners that we're going to be meeting with in May, first week of May, we've developed a kind of a quick survey to begin getting their maps into this, and then we'll be sharing that with them, and they'll be able to share that more broadly with other audiences, such as with ECOP. One of the things that we think will happen as we look across this is we think that there are not a lot of players that are working in the area of awareness, nor are there a lot of players that are looking at adoption and utilization. We think that those are going to be very unique kind of niches that extension fills, and others, there are quite a few different entities that are in the access and availability realm. We expect that we'll see a lot of things mapped there. And then we think we'll see some things on policy and evaluation, but again, that's where research and extension is going to be, I think, have a very strong presence. So we're looking forward to what we get from that process and being able to share it with you more. So with that gives you just a sense of what the regional rural development centers have done in kind of a short time frame, and some responses that we're seeing from agencies on the federal level. And so with that, Bo, I will turn to you and let you talk a little bit about what's going on, showing a state perspective on this.
Rachel,
Thank
Bo,
you.
Can I just jump in real quick and just
Sure.
note too that for the directors that Sunny, when this came out, we pushed this information out through Sunny, and that got the attention of the Secretary's office, and they requested a meeting with me and him to dig deeper in terms of the work that the land grant system is doing related. So they came away quite impressed by this, and I think the awareness level, at least, of the great work that's already underway and the opportunities going forward increased substantively. So with that, Bo, I just wanted to share that with this group.
Yeah, thank you, Brent. Rachel, I assume you're going to be changing the slides when I need it? Right, okay. Hey, good afternoon. I, too, like Rachel and Brent, want to say thank you for letting me be part of this webinar today. We, like Rachel, received that report probably a couple of weeks before Jason Henderson and I had a chance to go and visit with Ann Hazlett and Gina Sheets of USDA Rural Development. And to be honest, we want to let them know, and we're only one example of what all of us in land grant schools can do, is we began to let them know the kind of work we're already doing that could be collapsed into these 5 major groupings, and things we're working on or it's emerging that we think is also on the cutting edge with regard to these 5 thematic areas. So, and I think all of you, Chuck, I know the work you're doing in Nebraska, many other places, you're all doing some good work. And the question is, how can we get USDA Rural Development and obviously Secretary Purdue to realize there's some darn good work going on, and it's just a matter of capturing it and communicating that to our rural development, to our USDA colleagues, which is obviously one of the things we're doing today. So what we did is we took these 5 major thematic areas and began to articulate what we're doing under each of these 5 themes to let Ann Hazlett and Gina Sheets at the time realize, you know what, you don't have to start from scratch. There's some good work going on at Purdue and other places that we need to take advantage of. So I'm not going to get a lot of detail. I just want to give you a quick snapshot of some of these things on the e-connectivity, quality of life, rural workforce, obviously technological innovation, and rural economy. And I'm going to just give a sampling of each of these 5 groupings, just to give you, again, a flavor for what we're doing that we think relates to this report. So Rachel, if you want to go to the next one. As you probably know, my Mississippi State colleagues haven't talked to me in a long time since Roberto Gallardo came to work for us. I'm just kidding, but Roberto Gallardo used to be at Mississippi State. He worked with Rachel and me at the Southern Rural Development Center, and then moved into position with one of the other centers on campus that does an extension that does a lot of technology training and education and adoption. So I just want to let you know a couple of reports that we think might be of interest to you. Roberto and I did put together, along with Indranil Kumar, a report on digital divide in the U.S. And I want to let you know this because the data we've produced is actually on our website, and we have data on every county in the nation. So all of you could, if you find it of use, we could actually help create some information. But this is actually a report that he did just on the U.S. that talks about really, again, the importance of technology, particularly broadband. And then we have another report that just came out. It's very specialized. It was done with a rural electric co-op, an REMC, but they want to look at the possibility of investing in broadband, but they need to understand what the benefit cost would be. The bottom line is that this report, which Wally Tyner, many of you who know is an ag economist, highly respected in terms of his work, but he did benefit cost analysis. And this is probably Brian Whitaker, as many of you know, is one of the premier rural broadband people, along with Roberto. He said he's never seen a report where there's actually literally a really detailed assessment of why does broadband bring significant benefit to rural places. And this report is about ready to be released next week. Something that you might find of value as you try to recommend or urge people to realize that it's a phenomenal return on the investment in rural America when you look at broadband. So those are a couple of reports I want to let you know about in the e-connectivity area. The other thing is, again, Roberto's work on, if you want to change it, Rachel, this is just an example of how, as Rachel said, and Brent, it's not only the infrastructure, it's also the adoption. So what he did is he looked at two streams of work. One is the extent to which a county may be lagging. The lower the number, the greater the digital divide. So I should say it's a lower divide. So the higher the number, the more the digital divide. So this is a county where the divide was much more infrastructure than it was the socioeconomic characteristics of the people. As you know, there's certain things that make you less likely to adopt if you're low income, if you have limited speed, if you have a high number of elderly people and whatnot. So what he did is he created these two different dimensions, and it allows the community to be able to focus on, should we be talking about the infrastructure, or should we be talking about adoption, promoting adoption if you have a major divide due to the socioeconomic conditions. We can do this for literally every county in the nation. We have the data for it. But the other thing he put is he drew from the work from Mark Partridge at Ohio State, who had been looking at what's the lost economic benefit if you don't have broadband. So what Roberto was able to do for this county, it's a $14 million loss to the economy because of lack of adoption. But he said if you were to be able to improve adoption by 20%, you'd have a net gain of $14 million to your economy. And so that's just an example of how it really gets the attention of people. Rachel, next one. So what Roberto and a team has done is they've begun to build a program called Digital Ready Communities. It builds on Chuck's stuff that Connie has done in Nebraska and some of your team. But it actually, we've built on some stuff that Rachel did and all of us did it when we were at the SRDC. But you have 11 modules now that are about ready to be released. Actually, they're all done, but they're up to date, brand new material that really talks about how can we help small businesses become digitally ready. And this is just an example of a card that we have on these topics. And then, so that's what I want to kind of let you know about what we're doing in the e-connectivity space. Go ahead, Rachel, next one. Under the quality of life, as you know, one thing they have in a report, they have a lot of different things, but one of them is housing. We have found in Indiana that housing in rural Indiana is a major, major problem, not only in terms of the quality and condition, but it's also the fact that that's an impediment. The lack of quality housing is making it very difficult to not only retain, but also attract talent. So this is a thing that we're looking at now. We're trying to provide more information and data to regions and counties so they can make better decisions about their housing needs. And this is an example, this regional snapshot is something brand new we've come out with. And Rachel, if you want to go to the next slide, this kind of gives you a very brief outline of the data we look at. It's about 40 pages long, but done in a very visually pleasing way. very succinct, to the point, bullet points, just to let people know these are the real issues that you're facing. It could be quality, it could be variety, it could be just cost, whatnot. So this really provides them a really nice avenue with regard to the issue of housing, which is one of the things that report does focus on. The third dimension, Rachel, is on rural workforce. You've seen that. We had a team that put together a nice curriculum that's really targeted primarily to our 4-H or youth audiences, high school age, whatnot, but also to adults who may be with less than a high school education, or even some who may be incarcerated, not for major offenses, but maybe on the pathway of being able to be released and hopefully find a gainful employment when they leave the correctional system. So we've got this program trying to use titles that seem to be attractive to young people, like, pass the buck and, what skills will pay the bills, nice to meet you, stuff like that, instead of talking about, but it's all kind of professional skill related. How do we build the soft skills of young people? This is what this curriculum is about, and that's available as well. We just released that about 5-6 months ago. The next one I want to tell you about is a unique relationship we built with a manufacturing extension partnership at Purdue. The Purdue MEP heard time and time again from companies, manufacturers in Indiana, that they were having a whale of a time finding talent. They just simply can't get people to be able to apply for these positions because the numbers we just don't have the pipeline. So what MEP did is start this manufacturing training, a 10-day training, certification training for individuals with less than high school education, those who are underemployed or unemployed, as well as those who are part of the correctional system. And this has really gone on very well so far. But they've asked Purdue, we've trained people in extension to take on the responsibility of training or teaching these 5 topics you see in the top of your screen. And again, these are all professional, soft skills related, other than the basic shop math. We don't tell people how to use math in the shop, but we basically show them just basic math and how that applies in the manufacturing sector. The other things that are much more deep dives in manufacturing, the MEP does that. So we have this really interesting partnership. Something I think many of you who have MEP programs with your universities, this is a great opportunity, I think, to build a workforce, a training or workforce development effort, a synergistic effort. I'm almost done here. I got a couple more. The technological innovation side, I just want to let you know that, and I know Chuck was here at Purdue, the Lilly Endowment is a major philanthropy in the state of Indiana. They just awarded a 10-county region, Tippecanoe. You'll see Tippecanoe. That's where Purdue is located at. They've given them almost $35 million to work on the Internet of Things, and it's going to be applied to digital agriculture. It's going to be applied to next generation manufacturing, and there's a third component called Regional Collaboration Fund. And if Rachel can move to the next slide, I'll show you. I'm not going to get into detail. Just know that we're looking at a lot of digital applications of agriculture, really cutting edge stuff. We'll work with a lot of manufacturers in the 10-county region to really promote, the sensors, all the different ways in which sensors can be used in manufacturing as well as ag. And then there's a $10 million cultivation fund where counties in the region will have to work together, not all 10 counties necessarily together, but building at least a multi-county regional effort to try to look at quality of life factors. And it could be education, could be community vitality, it could be placemaking, connectivity, of course, talks about broadband, but there's a variety of different ways that they're looking for innovation. And this is, I think, again, cutting edge stuff. Of the 10 counties, I think I'd say 8 are rural. So it's going to have a lot of relevance, I think, to some of the things that the USDA is looking for in terms of innovation. Then the final thing I want to tell you about is this is not, I've got 2 more slides. Many of you know that there's a phenomenal amount of business retention expansion work going on nationally. I'd say that University of Minnesota, Minnesota Extension, our Ohio State Extension have been leaders in the BR&E space. There have been others as well. I just want you to know that with the help of Minnesota and Ohio State, particularly Ohio State, we've really taken their curriculum, which was really much more of a worksheet or guide, and put this into a 5-module curriculum so that we can actually train our educators to deliver comprehensive BR&E training, or at least to communities, so they can become much more adept at how you do a really good BR&E program, a long-term, ongoing BR&E program. This is just on the cusp of being released, but again, it's a value added to what Ohio State and Minnesota have done. That we think hopefully will be of value to our whole extension system. And the final thing I want to tell you about is we want to give you just a sampling of what we've done, only because I think what we're trying to do, USDA Rural Development, as Brent talked about, the Rural Innovation Center, data informatics is going to be a big deal for them. And my perspective is that we have phenomenal people in groups across our land-grant institutions who are doing outstanding deep dive data analyzation and visualization. And I'm just sharing with you some of what we've done here at Purdue, both through extension and our center, the Purdue Center for Regional Development, that we think are examples of how we can put in the hands of decision makers really good data in a way that is meaningful and helpful to them as they try to make some tough decisions about the future of their economies or the future of their communities and their regions. So this is just an example of some of what we've done that welcome you to come and look at that and to check it out when you have a chance. By the way, the one on measuring communities is just one we've done. That's one focused specifically on military veterans and active military. It deals specifically about where they at, what are some of the health issues, education issues. We have a variety of different domains that we've worked with the Military Family Research Institute here at Purdue in building this database, and it's really, really quite powerful. So with that, let me just go ahead and stop, and I think we're on the last slide for discussion.
Well, thank you all for our presenters. Great job. Lots to think about. So let's open it up for questions and conversation. Who would like to start?
So Chuck, I might just show something right quickly, and I'll put this slide back up in 1 second. When we talk about a template as one possibility, we shared this with our board just a couple of days ago as an idea, and this is not driving the bus, but just to kind of give a sense of what a template might look like. We did 2 different approaches, and our board seemed to think about this fairly favorably. But one possibility might be to develop something that could be shared across the nation or by region, where we develop a similar template and each state can enter their own information. And extension and research both have a place in this, and then essentially just be able to adapt this, but to have possibly a single site repository where a legislator, an agency program leader, or someone that's interested in what extension's doing could go to one single place and either look at an aggregate kind of approach to how this goes together, or even go state by state. And so this is one of the ways that we started just bouncing ideas around. And we also did another one that looks almost the same, except that it is looking at, instead of 5 approaches, it still has the 5 priorities across the top where you could list your programs and then uncheck boxes. But this one on the backside goes into a more deeper dive of a single program, single impact story. So just wanted to share those because it was noted that, what do we mean by template might be just to give us something to kind of start from. And I will put the question back up.
So this is Chuck. One of the questions I had is that, I think maybe it was Brent, I'm not sure, mentioned USDA Rural Development and their role in all of this. Bo, you talked about meeting with Ann, and so could you talk a little bit more about what you understand from a USDA RD perspective in terms of what they might be doing in this space?
Well, I can start because as they've stood up this Rural Innovation Center under the leadership of Gina Sheets, they've identified a number of areas that they're going to work specifically in, and one of them is in the data and innovation, the technology that Bo just emphasized, and so they're looking then to make data-driven decisions about, in that particular instance, the best use and utilization of RD grant and loan programs. They also have a group around strategic partnerships that are looking across these various areas. And so we met recently with some of the folks who are specifically interested in disaster recovery, and again, how are rural development loans being utilized and applied for in areas like Texas, Florida, Puerto Rico, and what changes might they do to some of their language in order to ensure, better uptake and success in terms of getting funding out the door quickly to address recovery issues. We met with them again to talk again about the importance on the front end and the work that the Southern Center and again, Bo's time there when they developed the Ready Community curriculum in conjunction with FEMA, how some of the land grants have specifically worked in space, obviously what the Extension Disaster Education Network is doing. So their focus areas are still coming into clarity, and as they staff up these teams within the Innovation Center. And so we're still just trying to make sure that at this point that they understand who we are, and again, the power and breadth and depth of the system, and the work that's already underway, and again, for us to be able to be collaborators with them in some of their approaches. The workforce development clearly is huge across the entire administration. That relates to the opioid issue in terms of folks not being able to pass drug tests or the workforce not being ready, based upon the various social skills, soft skills, so-called, that are needed. So we've got the workforce development team, extension team that Kenny Sharon, Cheryl Burkhart-Kreisel at Chuck's University that are leading up with funding from the North Central region. The Western Rural Development Center has the Workforce Development Fellows program that Don stood up recently. So we're having these conversations both with RD to help them understand, but also as we learn where their priorities are going to be at the table and then able to inform and collaborate appropriately.
Yeah, in fact, and I agree with what Brent said. The conversations we had with RD, one of the things they're very concerned about is the opioid issue. As you know, some of their the monies they have for infrastructure, they are really interested in trying to find ways to have money for housing be done for transition housing, or housing for at least to provide a safe environment for those who are facing this issue, who have an opioid addiction, to help them really be able to transition to society in a much more effective way. So they're really looking at unique ways to look at this opioid. But I agree with Brent, that's a workforce development issue. The studies are pretty shocking in terms of how many men who have opioid addictions who can't be contributors to their labor force because of this addiction. So I agree that I think we have an opportunity in land grants. I think what Rachel had is really, really good. To me, there's 2 or 3 overarching issues. I think rural workforce is a big issue, and that includes not only what we've talked about in terms of talent pipeline, but there's stuff like some of our Brian Whitaker and Roberto have been involved in is telework. In rural America, telework may very well become something of an option, but you can't do it without sufficient broadband. That's a big issue. I think that's going to real good evidence that telework could become a major option for a rural workforce that has access to much better broadband. Then the other one I think is it's just broadband in particular. What role we can play, as Rachel's doing with our SRDC on the building a much more cohesive broadband adoption strategy through extension. I think we've done that in the past. I think Rachel, I would probably agree. We were when we had the e-commerce extension initiative, we were probably ahead of the game, and now we're positioned to make a big difference quickly because we have a great team across the nation that could be mobilized to work in this area, or is mobilized to work in this area. By the way, one more thing, I don't know if is the Medicaid issue. I don't know if you know, there's a lot of conversations going on now about people on Medicaid having to work. And this is again where we in Extension can really help. How do we help people on Medicaid find the kind of valuable work that can help them meet that requirement that seems to be coming down by more and more states looking at that as an option.
Other comments or questions? You're also welcome to type in the chat if you'd prefer to do that, to log a question or comment. So I did have another question. And Bo, you mentioned like the e-commerce curriculum and some things like that. It does seem to me that deployment is not necessarily our key role in this, but certainly application use in all its forms. You know, I also think about telehealth and especially mental health, just a dearth of mental health resources in rural places across this country. But as we think about things like e-commerce, maybe, what kinds of curricula do we have? What kinds of shovel-ready programs do we have that it's really more just a matter of deploying those, or do we need to modernize? What's kind of the state of the art relative to applications for technology, for bandwidth?
So I'll start, and then Bo, feel free to chime in. So bringing this national team together as we did last January, just a few months ago, I think we are well ahead of thinking through that. We had a number of states, people from all 4 regions present in that. So we have some great people that have materials in their back pockets ready to go. This group also just launched a survey. In fact, I think it was launched this morning, if I remember correctly, to look at what are some other things going on in other states. So that's another place where you as the extension directors and administrators can assist us. It was launched to a broadband listserv that we've held and maintained for a number of years, that just anybody who's interested in this world. So it's quite a few people on this listserv. We'd love to find out who's doing the great work out there, Chuck. Part of the purpose of that was to see who's got that cutting edge great stuff in their back pocket that we just haven't identified. But additionally, we do have this leadership team that has set some specific goals and making sure that we update what we do know we have in hand, and then begin to think about how we could use these collectively. And I think that's something where we could use some great leadership and advice from this group about how you would like to see the work that is being brought together, how you would like to see that advanced across the nation as a system.
Chuck, what I would put forth, what Rachel said is correct. We have a great team nationally. The only thing we have is that's new is the stuff that I shared with you in this PowerPoint that Roberto has been spearheading with a team from Purdue Extension, and all that stuff is essentially ready. We're now pilot testing it across the state, but it's available. If anybody wants to pilot test it, they could do that. We're going to try to do this initially face to face, but the intent is to do most of it online, but just a few of these being face to face. As a more of an overview and introduction to people about this program. So, and we're going to be doing this in concert with our Small Business Development Center system in the state. Yeah.
Cool. Other questions or comments?
I'm going to drop the link to the survey in the chat box. If some of you know that you've got people in your state that are doing some work, or you think they might be interested in participating in the survey, it's open, all people invited. So feel free to pull that and share that within your own state.
Cool. Thank you, Rachel. And also, Mike Gaffney said he had to leave, but talked about alignment with initiatives already underway in Washington. So broadband, rural, digital workforce, and disaster education and preparedness. So I did have another question, and it really relates to who in state government are potentially important partners for this work. And I know the work that we've been doing over the years, our Public Service Commission and the Universal Service Fund have been good resources that we've been able to access. Who else or what other linkages have you seen states use relative to state government partners?
I'll jump in, Chuck. In fact, that reminded me. I was actually going to mention, when I had the budget slide up and the potential resources, a lot of the state governors are doing their own broadband initiatives. In fact, NTIA had a webinar either yesterday or the day before that featured like 3 different states and the investments that their specific governors are providing around broadband. Again, a lot of them were access, telehealth, telemedicine discussion, and also smart cities and smart communities. So I would just encourage folks to identify that potential source in the governor's office for each of the states, and then establish contact or find out what they may be doing. Certainly NTIA would be a resource as well to potentially identify that information on a more national scale. Rachel or Bo?
I would just add the USDA Rural Development, your state directors might be good folks to tap. Most of them are fairly new in their appointments, but this may be a good time to either establish or reconnect to them and look for the linkages that could happen in that direction.
This is Ed, and I would like to add that in some of the southern states, the funds that were a result of the master tobacco settlement have been targeted in that direction. So that's another opportunity.
Yeah, good to see you, Ed. For Indiana, let me just tell you, just as timely, yesterday the Lieutenant Governor announced the creation of a brand new Director of Broadband Opportunities position. It'll be at the state level. It's probably because she's been hit left and right and everywhere else by legislators and local people about the need to strengthen broadband in rural Indiana. So they actually are creating a position that will be essentially being the broadband guru or czar for the state, and that's really, really helpful. But we also have a policy director in the Lieutenant Governor's office who's spearheading broadband efforts. And then we have the Office of Community and Rural Affairs. I know, Chuck, you remember OKRA. They've actually, this year, the legislature passed the legislation to create a broadband planning grant program. That's now going to be administered by that agency. And that will be providing rural communities with the opportunity to apply for a grant where they actually develop a plan, and then the expectations that they will then work to implement that plan with providers. Probably the final thing is that they've passed legislation to allow the rural electric co-ops to be able to have fiber optics over the telephone lines without having to pay a fee, rental fee or some type of fee to the companies that may own those poles. Anyway, we have an Indiana Electric Co-op. They connect all the REMCs. And as far as I'm concerned, the REMCs will be a major player, along with USDA Rural Development rural utility services with regard to broadband penetration in rural areas of the country. So those are a couple specific agencies with whom we're working.
Good. And I think every state is different. Nebraska has this weird law that says utilities can't cross over. So we have a statewide network of public power distribution transmission systems, and they can't run broadband fiber down those lengths. It's just ridiculous. But maybe someday we'll get it figured out here in Nebraska. There's always something, right? One other thing I did want to mention, so rural medicine, telehealth has come up a couple of times. Here in Nebraska, our med center, which is separate from UNL, but our med center actually has a strategic plan for rural medicine. And so they've been an interesting partner for us to really build capacity with. And, you know, for some communities, maybe broadband relative to business development and things like that is interesting. But the minute you start talking about health and healthcare, when you're 100 miles from the closest hospital or 50 miles from the closest emergency room, telehealth becomes a much more interesting conversation. So that's kind of where we're at in Nebraska.
You know, we've also seen that rural development has looked at the infrastructure piece related to STEM education. So I think that's an opportunity even to bring in both workforce, but also looking at what could be the space that 4-H can have in this conversation also.
Absolutely. Well, folks, it seems like maybe we've come to the end of our conversation. I just really want to thank Brent and Rachel and Bo for giving us your time today. And I know you did some prep work, right? Angie worked you through the paces to get ready for this. So thank you all for your time today. Thank you, Angie, for your support. As always, we'll get a link on this up on the Extension Monday Minute website and let everybody know. A note, Mike Fitzner just posted that we do have a new, in fact, I think this is public because I did see it somewhere else. Dr. Tom Schanauer, I'm not sure the pronunciation, will be the acting director of NIFA. And that Dr. Schanauer comes from ARS and has been working on the West Coast. So there's our interim director for NIFA. Glad we have someone on board. Well, again,
yeah, so that's news here, Chuck, for me, hearing it for the first time. And the name, Sonny met with us yesterday and said it was forthcoming. He also indicated there was likely to be a nominee for undersecretary, so that they could have been coming in tandem. So if Fitzner has any other intel, feel free to share it.
He did send that privately, so Mike, I apologize if I spilled the beans. I did hear that this guy's another entomologist. So 2 entomologists in a row, really?